Chapter 17 of Station Amusements in New Zealand by Lady Mary Anne Barker. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Gail Timmerman Vaughan. Chapter 17. Odds and Ends. My nerves had hardly recovered from the shock of having the care of such a huge patient thrust on me, for seriously speaking, Fenwick took a good deal of nursing and attention before he got well again, when we had another night alarm. Our beautiful summer weather was breaking up. High nor'westers had blown down the gorges for days, and now a cold, wet gale was coming up in heavy banks of fleecy clouds from the sou'west. Everything looked cold and wretched out of doors, but the sheep farmers were thankful and pleased. Their mobs could find excellent shelter for themselves, for it takes very bad weather to herd a merino sheep, and the creeks had been running rather low. "We shall have a splendid autumn after this is over," said all the squatters gleefully, "with lots of feed. There's Tyler's Creek coming down beautifully." So I was fain to be content, though my fowls looked draggled and wretched, and my pet patch of mignonette became a miniature desert, its fragrance being all blown and rain-beaten away. Good fires of lignite and wood made the house cheery, and we went to bed hoping for fine weather next day. In the middle of the night everyone was wakened by a tremendous echoing noise outside, whilst the frail wooden house vibrated perceptibly. It could not be caused by the wind, for although the rain kept pouring steadily down, the furious sou'west gusts had long ago been beaten into a sullen silence by the descending torrents. For a moment, and half awake, an old tropical reminiscence floated through my sleepy, startled mind. Can it be an earthquake? I dreamily wondered. But no earthquake of my acquaintance was ever yet so resounding and noisy, for all its crumbling horror. Yet the house was certainly shaking. "What is it? What are you doing?" rang in shouts through the little dwelling, as its dwellers came thronging one after another to our door. Frightened as I was, I can perfectly remember how indignant I felt when it became clear to my mind that they all thought we were making such an uproar. How could we do it, if even we had wished to get out of our warm beds and create a disturbance on such a wild night? "Good gracious, the house is coming down!" I cried, as a fresh shudder ran through the slight framework of our little wooden home. "Pray go out and see what is the matter." Thus urged, F opened a casement on the sheltered side, if any side could be said to be sheltered in such weather, and cautiously put his head out. I peered over his shoulder, and never can I forget the ridiculous sight which met our eyes. There, dripping and forlorn, huddled together under the wide roof of our summer parlour, as the veranda used often to be called, the whole mob of horses had gathered themselves. The garden gate chanced to have been left open, and, evidently under old Jack's guidance, they had all walked into the veranda, wandered disconsolately up and down its boarded floor, and after partaking of a slight refreshment in the shape of my best creepers, had proceeded to make themselves at home by rubbing their wet sides against the pillars and the wooden sides of the house itself. No wonder the noise had aroused us all. Iron-shod hoofs clattering up and down a boarded veranda is not a silent performance, and Jack was so cool and impudent about it, positively refusing to stir from the sheltered corner by the silver pheasant's aviary, which he had chosen for himself. The other horses evidently felt they were intruders, and were glad enough, on the flapping of a handkerchief, to hurry out of their impromptu stables, making the best of their way through the narrow garden gate, and so out upon the bleak hills again. But Jack's conduct was very trying. He found himself perfectly comfortable, and evidently intended to remain so. Neither for wishing nor coaxing, for fair words nor foul, would he stir. It seemed so horrid to have to dress and go out in such a downpour of rain, that we weakly deliberated on the expediency of letting the cunning old stock-horse remain. But fortunately at that moment he began to scratch his ear with his hind foot, waking up 1,000 echoes against the side of the house as he did so, and making the pictures dance again on the canvas and paper walls. "This will never do," cried we all desperately. "He sure must be taken to the stable, or he'll come back again." That was exactly what Jack meant and wanted. So to the stable he went, under poor shivering Mr. Yu's guidance, and the old rogue spent a dry, warm night under its roof. It was the more absurd Jack, pretending to be afraid of a wet night, when he had walked many and many a weary mile over the rough mountain passes towards the west coast, with a heavy pack on his back, and in all sorts of weather. A tradition existed in our neighbourhood that Jack had once been met crossing the Amuri Downs with a small barrel organ, an American cooking stove, and a sow with a litter of young ones, all packed on his back, and stepping out bravely under them all, as my informant added. But I cannot vouch for the truth of the items of this load. Jack's fame as a stock horse, as well as a pack horse, stood high in the Malvern Hills, but his conduct in the shafts was eccentric, to say the least of it. He could not bear to be guided by his driver, and was always squinting over his blinkers in the most ridiculous manner. If he perceived a mob of cattle or horses on a distant flat, he would set off to have a look at them, and determine whether they were strangers or friends, dragging the gig after him over bank, bush, and scour. Once, when we were in great despair for a cart-horse, Jack was elected to the post, but long before we had come to the journey's end, we regretted our choice. It was during the first summer of my life in the Malvern Hills, and whilst the nor'westers were still steadily setting their breezy faces against such a new-fangled idea as a lawn, I wearied of sowing grass seed at a guinea a bag, long before those extremely rude zephyrs got tired of blowing it all out of the ground. There was my beautiful set of croquet, fresh from Jacques, lying idle in its box in the veranda, and there was my charming friend Alice S., longing for a game of croquet. When the pretty young ladies wish for anything very much, and the house is full of gentlemen, it goes hard, but they get the desire of their innocent hearts. So it was in this case. One fine afternoon Alice wandered into the veranda, and peeped for the 100th time into the box. "Ah, what beautiful things," she sighed, "and how hard it is we can't have a game." "I know a patch of self-sown grass," sang one of the party, "whereupon we might play a game." "Where, oh where?" we asked in eager chorus. "About 2 miles from this, near a deserted shepherd's hut. It is as thick and soft as green velvet, and the sheep keep it quite short." "Is the ground level?" we inquired. "As flat as this table," was the satisfactory answer. Of course, we wanted to start immediately, but how were we to get the croquet things there, to say nothing of the delightful excuse for tea out of doors, which immediately presented itself to my ever-thirsty mind? A dray was suggested. Carriages we had none, there being no roads for them if we had possessed such vehicles. But alas and alas! The proper dray and driver and horse were all away, on an expedition up a distant gully, getting out some brushwood for fires. "There's Jack," someone said doubtfully. He had never even drawn a dray in his life, so far as we knew, but at the same time we felt sure that once Jack understood what was required of him, he would do his best to help us to get to our croquet ground. So we flew off to our different duties. Alice to see that the balls, hoops, and mallets were all right in numbers and colours, etc. I to pack a large open basket with the materials for my favourite form of dissipation, an outdoor tea, and the gentleman to catch Jack and harness him into the cart. Peals of laughter announced the setting forth of the expedition, and no wonder. Inside the dray, which was a very light and crazy old affair, was seated Alice on an empty flour sack. By her side I crouched on an old sugar bag, one of my arms keeping tight hold of my beloved tea basket, with its jingling contents, whilst the other was desperately clutching at the side of the dray. On a board across the front 3 gentlemen were perched, each wanting to drive, exactly like so many small children in a goat carriage, and like them, one holding the reins, the other the whip, and the third giving good advice. In the shafts stood poor shaggy old Jack, looking over his blinkers as much as to say, "What do you want me to do now?" Our good-humoured and stalwart cadet, Mr. U, walked backwards, holding out a carrot and calling Jack to come and eat it. In this extraordinary fashion we proceeded down the flat for 200 or 300 yards, one carrot succeeding the other in Jack's jaws rapidly. Mr. U was just beginning to say, "Look here, don't you think we ought to take turns at this?" when Jack caught sight of a creek right before him. He only knew of one way of crossing such obstacles, and that was to jump them. No one calculated on the sudden rush and high bound into the air with which he triumphantly cleared the water, knocking Mr. Yu over and scattering his 3 drivers, like summer leaves, on the track. As for Alice and me, the inside passengers, we found the sensation of jumping a creek in a dray most unpleasant. All the croquet balls leapt wildly up into the air, to fall like a wooden hailstorm around us. The mallets and hoops bruised us from our head to our feet, and the contents of my basket were utterly ruined. Not only had my teacups and saucers come together in one grand smash, and the kettle broke the bottle of cream, which in its turn absorbed all the sugar. Jack looked coolly round at us with an air of mild satisfaction, as if he thought he had done something very clever, whilst our shrieks were rending the air. What a merry, light-hearted time of one's life that was! We all had to work hard, and our amusements were so simple and Arcadian that I often wonder if they really did amuse us so much as we thought they did at the moment. Let all New Zealanders who doubt this look into those perhaps closed chapters of their lives, and as memory turns over the leaves one by one, and pictures like the sketches I try to reproduce in pen and ink grow into distinctness out of the dim past, it will indeed surprise me very much if they do not say, as I do, my pleasant task ended. Ah, those were happy days indeed. End of chapter 17. End of Station Amusements in New Zealand by Lady Mary Anne Barker. Read by Gail Timmerman Vaughan.